Nice one. Well, welcome to a special, very special episode of Pivotal Slice today. We're talking with a music producer and writer.
Hiatus.
Yeah, I spoke to Cyrus a couple of weeks ago, and it was a very insightful, enjoyable session that we had together. And he's just a really interesting person that has a lot of interesting things to say about music and artistic expression. And it's just a really honest, open, candid discussion about being an artist.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about his music then. He kind of blends like Iranian instrumentation and that kind of thing with more like ambient electronic beats. Is that right?
Yeah, we talk about it in the interview. Yeah, we do talk about his sound, and it's very distinctive and just very uniquely him. It very much encompasses his experiences and his family history and sort of into a contemporary type landscape, which is very important, I think, as an artist, to incorporate these different things together. Is something that we both do, I feel, as well.
So important to put yourself into the work that you're creating and really draw on your life and your experiences and your roots. That's what's going to set you apart, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, we'll play the interview, and we have I'm going to play another exclusive track at the end as well. So keep with us for that. Yeah, we hope you enjoy the show.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like every child, creativity is sort of comes as sort of standard, doesn't it? It seems that kids are naturally creative, naturally curious and inquisitive. I was, I was really into music as a kid. I think, my brother's got a couple of kids that are sort of about the age that I was when I started kind of fiddling around with pianos and I just see that in them, that kind of boundless like enthusiasm. And I think that to say that I was sort of special in that way would be untrue, because I think everyone that I knew was kind of into music and excited about music at that age. But yeah, I mean there were definitely like the thing that I do remember feeling like an emotional connection with music. I remember feeling that it seemed to connect with me in some sort of emotional way. I remember just feeling kind of profoundly sort of moved by music as a kid, especially film music. And I suppose some of the earliest memories that I have of being sort of transported by music are by the soundtracks of films. Very early on, I sort of figured out how to record soundtracks from films and from television onto a tape, and I did a lot of that. Soundtracks to movies that I loved, I would just like record a piece of music onto a cassette tape sort of over and over, so I didn't have to kind of rewind it. So one cassette tape would just have the same bit of music on it from beginning to end, which at the time was a really like labor intensive thing to do. And obviously took forever rewinding the tape and stuff like that. But and also listening to a lot of like my dad's Iranian music was very it was very I think looking back now, I think that was a very kind of significant kind of shaping experience. My dad moved with me and my mum when I was like one from Iran, and Iranian culture sort of didn't have that much of a role in my life growing up, but the music did still kind of, it was, my dad would listen to it and would get really emotional listening to it. I could sort of tell that he was moved by it. He played it kind of quite privately. He wasn't someone that just played it, when people came around. It was always something that he would do in a kind of like communion with, his culture. And I think I sensed that. He would play it when we drove on kind of like early morning drives to see my mum's parents in Dorset, because my mum's English. And, we'd get up at like 4 a.m. to beat the traffic, and everyone in the car, he would think everyone was asleep. So he'd be playing these Iranian cassette tapes, and I used to sit in the back and sort of listen to them. I think that was quite a sort of formative experience. And then the only other thing I can think of is the piano. I mean, I sort of went to a birthday party at a friend's house when I was very young, and they had a piano, and I just sat at it and started kind of figuring out how to play like Three Blind Mice, I think it was. And when my mum came to pick me up, I was kind of like, look, mummy, I figured out how to play Three Blind Mice on the piano. And that was it. I mean, the piano was a kind of huge part of my life sort of from then on. So yeah, there are definitely memories of music, very early memories of music. Some of my earliest memories are musical memories, for sure. And actually, and I also, sorry, I know I said that was the last thing, but also I do also have this really, like, that thing of how some childhood memories aren't really memories. They're more like kind of feelings. You remember a sort of feeling. It's like sort of almost synesthetic. I remember vinyl having this like, because it was just records back then. I mean, cassette tapes came a bit later, but I remember my earliest memories of music being of vinyl, and just this kind of weird kind of power that it had. It just felt, I remember putting the needle on it. I had an Adam and the Ants record, was my first ever record. I was so young. And it's hard to kind of remember it visually, but when I hear the opening kind of drum beats of like Prince Charming from that album, I just remember it as a kind of feeling in my body that it gave me. To this day, it's probably the musical cue that has the most kind of the weirdest, almost like dreamlike impact. The place it sends me to is almost like kind of pre-memory. It's just so odd.
Wow,
such a great record as well.
Fantastic. Yeah. So what's the feeling then? Could you describe that feeling that record?
It's a kind of boundlessness. It's kind of like, I think it feels like sort of space opening up inside. It sort of breaks down boundaries. And I think that's what music can do. I think that's what we've all been kind of told music has the power to do. And I think as a very young kid, hearing music like that and sort of sensing it coming from this weird like just disc, it just felt like it kind of just eroded all the kind of edges of everything. It just kind of like made everything sort of merge together and just become a kind of oneness. It was very meditative, it was a very kind of like transcendent experience. That kind of boundlessness that you get from like sort of deep sort of meditation or, I don't know, psychedelics or something like that. As a young child, I was experiencing it from Adam and the Ants. It was just bonkers.
That's amazing. I really like that you described that as boundless, breaking down boundaries, because I really get that from your music.
Oh well, thank you.
These kind of this real sense of emotion and dynamics and space. That boundless. I can really hear that in the spaces that your music is poured into the air of, these huge environments.
It's a lovely way to put it. Thank you.
And you're absolutely right with feelings, and I love that. I love that image of you in the car with your dad when he was thinking everyone was sleeping, and connecting with his emotions and feeling the feelings that he was feeling. I think that's a really beautiful description of a memory.
I think music's a very it's a real kind of it has that quality of allowing you to kind of almost step into people's. I think it's a great sort of empathic tool. I think one of the rarest thing in the world at the moment is empathy. Like real empathy. Not like pity or kind of Imagine what it would be like to walk in someone's shoes, but to actually kind of to really believe that someone has a kind of a life, a kind of like a whole life of their own. It's really hard for us because we're so convinced that we're unique, and our lives are the only ones that really matter. But music, I think, has that power to allow you to experience what it's like, almost to see the world through someone else's eyes. Sometimes, not always, but I get this when I play music that I've made to someone as a kind of like listening exercise. When I've got someone that I trust and I want them to give me an opinion, and I genuinely care about their opinion, and I sit in a room with them and play them something that I've worked on. Sometimes I can tell immediately, it's like I've listened to it 100 times and then I play it to someone, and before it's even really started, I'm like, oh, I can totally see what is wrong with this. I can sense it because they can sense it. It's like I can gauge from there. I don't know, maybe that's just a kind of trick of the mind, but it sometimes feels like you're kind of hearing it through other people's ears. It's weird. I mean, obviously music's a kind of magical thing.
That's fascinating. I totally agree. Yeah, it's a big part of my process as well, is to play it when I'm in the development stage to a very small number of people, like you said, that I really trust and who really understand me and get what I'm doing and who I am. And like I have the same experience. It's like, again, we're going back to that feeling in the car, right, with your dad. It's like you have that rapport with the person, especially if they're in the room, and you're able to feel what they're feeling, right? That's what you're saying, isn't it?
I think so. I that's how it feels. Yeah. It's a really kind of special thing, and music is, it's a great kind of connector and a great kind of a great empathizer. It allows you to just kind of be sort of with people in ways that are so important, especially now more than ever.
That's beautiful, and that actually kind of answers a question that I was gonna ask, is that the sort of how you view the music that you do as being in the world, and what function does that have. And I think talking about empathy and connection and understanding.
I mean, it's hard. It's sort of kind of hard to express, really, because I think this sort of stuff changes. Your views on it change, and the way that I feel about my music is different now to how I felt about it 5 years ago. Definitely to how I felt about it 10 or 15 years ago. When I kind of started out doing what I'm doing, and I think that for me to say that I have this kind of set like blueprint for how I feel my music kind of works in the world, or the role that it plays in the world, I don't really know. I mean, it's a personal thing, obviously. I think that there's a sort of, as I've gotten older, I've kind of wanted to kind of be less present personally in what I do, in the music that I make. I've wanted it to be less about me, for me to cast less of a shadow, and my life to be less kind of, important to it, or, it just felt like it was taking up quite a lot of space, in terms of lyrics and stories and stuff like that. I just, so there's that kind of thing of wanting it to be a bit more communal, a bit more kind of, I think the thing is, there's a role that music plays generally. Like, there's a role, obviously, that art plays generally. I don't think that's any different now to how it to what it was like, in the 1500s or the kind of 1500 BC. There's a need for transcendence. There's a need to escape the kind of the countless sort of traps of the world. And you can talk about the modern world, and it's a mess, but the world has probably always been a mess. We've always been on the same path. It's always been a sort of cobbled together from the best we can do, which is just not that good, really, when you think about how much better it could be. And art of any sort, I think, offers a way of kind of understanding, or at least kind of interpreting being in the world, and just like the craziness of it all, but also an escape from it, a kind of, a sort of it certainly gives meaning to the life. I mean, it can give meaning to the life of the artist, for sure. It can be a good reason to get up in the morning, you know, to feel like you're going to try and transmute the kind of experience, the raw material of the world into music or into writing or whatever it is. But I think also, you know, music has allowed me, other people's music has allowed me to find meaning as well, you know, when I was younger, and you know, I needed to kind of make sense of things that just didn't make any sense. Music had that power, film had that power, you know, books have that power. And yeah, without them, God, I mean, just doesn't bear thinking about. Thankfully, we don't have to think about it. There will always be people creating stuff that just helps us get through, you know, this madness, you know.
It's interesting, you know, hearing you reflect on yourself, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and you have mentioned the word transcendence and meditation, and I'm just wondering what the difference you feel is in yourself from who you were 5, 10, 15 years ago to where you are now, and you know, what has sort of facilitated that change, would you say?
I mean, in some ways, nothing's changed. In some, you know, it's, I think if there was a problem with the, you know, 15 years ago version of me, then it was that thing that I mentioned earlier, that kind of, that sort of belief, that sort of singular belief that it's almost like solipsistic. It's like, you know, it's like a Truman Show style kind of belief that there's just, the whole thing's a kind of charade that's being put on for your benefit, and you know, your story is really, really important and unique. I mean, your story is really important and unique, but it is everyone else's story as well. You know, it's kind of one story, and so I mean, I think there's a sense that I now am a bit more like wary of that, and I try a bit more to kind of like to sort of live by that. But it's sort of different. It's one thing to kind of understand all this stuff, or at least think you understand it, or at least kind of want to understand it, and another thing to live by it. You know, I'm still subject to those same thoughts. I still have those same doubts. I still have that same kind of like, I still sort of slip in and out of thinking that it's all a bit of a, you know, a kind of a simulation theory type, you know, prank. The whole thing's just kind of a sort of a comedy, sort of escapade that I'm being made to endure for someone else's benefit. It's obviously there are no kind of answers to any of this, but I think the point is that to feel like you know how to live well is not the same thing as living well. And I feel like I've got a much better sense of what it is to live a kind of good life, sort of a life that has kind of, or at least, you know, a life that has some sort of value. But whether I do that or not on a day-to-day basis is subject to so many external factors that I have no control over, or feel like I have no control over. And I'm still as much of a mess now as I was when I was, you know, a teenager in many respects. Just one with different ideas, I guess. But I do meditate, so that's one thing that helps sometimes.
That's really a very honest and mature reflection. That's you know, I really respect that, because yeah, I think it would be, it's important to remain humble, isn't it, and to be open to the fact.
I think so. I you know, I think it is. I absolutely think it is. I think one of the problems with sort of spirituality generally is that people kind of turn into, you know, that they sort of become sort of like these self-made gurus. And I know quite a few people that are kind of ranting at each other on Twitter about, you're sort of just things that just kind of suggest that actually they don't really get it. Like, if you're telling other people how to live, you've kind of missed the point. It's not really how it all works. I'm still figuring it out, as I think everyone is. But I do hope that sometimes that kind of comes across in music. I know that when I was younger and when I was starting out, I was desperately trying to make sense of things that had happened in my life through music, and a lot of that came across in like lyrics and kind of visiting certain events and themes that kind of cropped up again and again, and then I think more recently there's been an attempt to make music that is more kind of meditative, that is less signposted, certainly that has less of kind of a script, that kind of less of the story of my life in it, and has more space in which people can maybe kind of find reflections of themselves, or kind of and then and every now and again you just come across music that just sounds good. It's like, I think there's a lot of the time that I and a lot of musicians that I kind of know or admire make or try to make music that has a kind of cosmic quality. It's like something that has this kind of space in it, and this kind of searching, kind of like philosophical, meditative thing, and it's all great. And when it works, it can just be the most mind-blowing experience to listen to. There are tracks by artists like William Basinski that have changed, my life at certain times when I've listened to them for days at a time. But every now and again, you just play something on the piano and it's just like, oh yeah, sometimes you just want to play like a riff. Sometimes you just want to play something that has like soul and, has that kind of like funk, or that kind of moves you in some way that's just kind of like physical. And, obviously it's there's always an emotional quality attached, but sometimes you just want music to make you feel good. Do you know what I mean? Like, to be fun. Music can be fun as well, and it's easy to forget that. I think there's a tendency to kind of be it's easy to I think it's easy to take yourself and to take music too seriously. I think it's easy to take everything too seriously. You need humour as well, I think, and I'm not sure how good at that I've been, but everything needs humour. The most, horror films need humour, science fiction needs humour, everything needs to have a lightness to it. But I think that's something I need to work on.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like your music does have that in it as well. Like, I might just
start putting a few jokes, kind of like intersperse it with occasional knock joke or something.
Excellent. Yeah, I think I just hearing you talk then is like, I can really hear that the work that you do is very well considered in terms of what it is that you do musically. Obviously, musically is an abstract thing, but you're also a writer. So
right, yeah.
I think there's an interesting parallel or crossover between what you are doing musically and how you are thinking about what you are doing musically. And I'm wondering what if either of those two things came first. You mentioned that in your childhood that you and children are just generally creative, and so were you exploring these two things together, or was how does writing and music, how do those two things evolve for you, and did you find them at the same time?
I mean, I think the thing with writing, I mean, I was very much growing up. They always both had a kind of part in my life. I was writing obsessively as a kid, and at school I just became like really into kind of creative writing, as it was called. I was lucky enough to go to a school where that was a thing that we actually did. You'd be kind of get to write fiction, short stories and stuff. I think the thing is, as I got kind of older, as I got into a kind of a working age life, I bounced between the two things mentally I would feel like whichever thing I was doing, it was the other one that I should be focusing on. If I was doing music, I was thinking I should be writing. If I was writing, I would think I should be doing music. I worked as a journalist for kind of like 10 years when I first moved to London after uni, and that, that was great. I mean, it was really satisfying. I never kind of broke any kind of, it never sort of elevated me to a place where I felt like, okay, this is kind of like what I want to be doing for the rest of my life. And music was kind of ticking away in the background. And I think the thing about it now, obviously, when music kind of became, I would never say it kind of took off, but when it became obvious that I could kind of do it full time, I didn't hesitate to stop being a journalist, because writing articles was never really what I wanted to spend my life doing. But I think what's interesting is that now the role that they occupy has sort of changed, and what I think music has. I think like music for me, it comes from a place that is kind of formless. You shape it to. And this is just the way that I see it. I'm not saying this is definitely just like my opinion, but it feels like music is kind of like it comes to you in this kind of like, formless kind of like clay that you shape. It's a sort of conduit from somewhere that you can never really know. It's the thing about writing is I think the words, it comes to you in the form of language, and language is problematic because language is at best a kind of like a flawed attempt to kind of freeze the kind of the experience of being. It's like kind of killing something to understand it. It will never, language is never going to really convey experience. You have to be alive to experience being alive. Language is a sort of a close kind of, well, it's not that close. It's words are kind of lifeless, whereas music is somehow always alive. It's kind of always kind of, it's sort of it sings with a kind of vivid presence. It's kind of real. It has to exist in the moment. It has to be kind of, I don't know, it feels much easier to sort of shake sort of the shadow of myself off in music than it is in writing. And I'm still writing. I try and write every morning. I'm kind of working on a thing at the moment, which I started a couple of years ago in the pandemic. And it's just like, I write a paragraph a day if I'm lucky. But that's enough for me to kind of satisfy that side of myself, like that, just that desire. Because I love playing with words. I'm not, I love language. I love writing. I love reading. But it always feels kind of like it carries the sort of the stink of the self a bit. It's hard to get rid of yourself in reading and writing in the way that it is in music. Music is like, it feels like kind of, embracing another life form, like an alien or a ghost or something. Whereas with writing, you're always sort of dancing with yourself a bit. So they've definitely evolved to have very different roles in my life in that sense. And also, no one really cares about my writing. Whereas with music, it's something that, there are people out there that do listen to the music that I make, and that's a blessing beyond sort of any that I could ever have hoped for. So that is, it would be very, it's lovely to talk about writing, but it's almost a bit embarrassing because it's like, well, no, I've never really, I've never kind of made it as a writer in that respect. But I will keep doing it forever. It's just something that, it gives me a great sort of sense of peace to do it.
That's lovely. Yeah, I think, it's really interesting what you're saying, because it sounds like you've got, we all have different parts of our being, and it's important to express different parts of ourselves in different ways, isn't it? It's almost like a kind of role playing, or like you can say things with words that you can't say with music the same way, and vice versa. So yeah, I think that's a really fascinating way to put those things.
Mm.
And it's interesting what you're saying about doing one and thinking about the other as well.
Yeah, God, I know.
I can relate to that because like for me when I was a kid it was like I was really into films as well. They were really and now I'm a big film buff and like I always wanted to make films and then when I was doing that I always wanted to make music and I had to sort of decide. I decided when I was like about 12 that I was going to pursue music seriously and but now like I'm in my late 30s and I'm thinking oh well maybe I will get back into making films. So it's like I think they inform each other, don't they?
They do. Yeah.
How do you think your music has informed your writing and your writing?
I think in the same way. It's the same thing of the sort of. I think I've just in both of those fields, I have simultaneously just become bored of myself, and I just don't want to write about myself either musically or on paper in words. I want to try and kind of convey something that's more universal, and the thing that I'm writing at the moment, it's sort of like about my family. It's a kind of, it started out as a thing about the pandemic and kind of moving back in with my parents. It's a lot of it's about my dad. But it's an attempt to kind of write a sort of, I've sort of slightly pretentiously at times referred to it as a kind of biography of the present moment. It's like a sort of, I wanted it to just be, it's in the present tense. It's kind of like flat, but it flashes forwards and backwards. There's bits about, the past, there's bits about the present, but it's just like, it's, I just want to write something that I don't really feature in some way. It's kind of, and I think that's true with music and with writing. In terms of how they inform each other, what you're saying about film, I think it's interesting that you mentioned getting to a point in your life where you think maybe you want to go back into film. I think a big part of it is that things happen at certain times for very good reasons. You could so easily, I could so easily go, I can't believe I wasted my 20s working as a journalist. That would just be completely just the wrong way to look at it, because if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have. I'm not really very. I'm not convinced by this whole like kind of alternative history stuff. Like, there's only one version of the world, and it's the one that you're living in. And you may not, be a kind of musician or a writer or a filmmaker at this point, but if that's the case, that's for a very kind of good set of reasons, which have led you to where you are. But that's not to say that you're not going to kind of go back to that thing later on. I love film as well. I've always loved it. I've always kind of like enjoyed playing with sort of, coming up with stuff for like video ideas and kind of like cobbling stuff together. And, it's all, I think the thing is, it's all part of the same kind of process. I mean, like a lot of the artists that I admire the most are real kind of Renaissance people who do little bits of everything. I mean, David Lynch is like, an example of someone who's like a musician and a painter and a sculptor and obviously a filmmaker. Like you say, they have those different mediums can take, can do different things at different times. But also, if you hit a seam with something, if you just find yourself at a point in your life where you're like, okay, actually, this is starting to make sense and I'm starting to find a voice. That thing about finding a voice is such a kind of cliche, but it's so true. To get to a point where you feel like your music or your writing or whatever it is finally, it has a consistency. It has a kind of like, there is a sort of sense in which you can kind of recognize yourself in it, or what you think of as yourself in it. That's definitely not the moment to put it down. That's the moment to kind of, forge forward with it. But yeah, never say never. This stuff always, there's always time.
Absolutely, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think I like what you're saying about having an experience of forging your own identity within the art form that you are involved in, and that's pervasive, isn't it? Because I mean, and your music is very filmic, by the way, and so is mine. I mean,
thank you.
Like,
yeah.
I think we have that in common, because it's like, those influences from other fields are like, one thing is everything in a way. You know, once you know it's getting to know yourself, really, isn't it? It's like
Yeah.
you're figuring out who you are, and what your place is in the world, and then once you know that can carry through. You mentioned David Lynch, and you know, his brand is so pervasive and embedded in like you're saying, his music, his writing, his filmmaking.
Yeah, absolutely. It is immediately recognisable. But I think there's also a sense with him, and I do think that, you know, there's that, you do go through that process as an artist of kind of finding your kind of your voice, your kind of the sound or the look or whatever it is that you do, and then I think there's a point where you just try and sort of use the work that you do to kind of annihilate it. You know, it's like you find it and then you try and kind of shake it off. You try and kind of lose it. And I think, you know, maybe that's just me being kind of maybe it's just hyperbolics, but that's how I feel. You know, I feel like that's the road that I feel like music has led me on. It's like, to an extent, it's like I've been kind of trying to find my own reflection, and then it's like you want to break the mirror and you want to kind of find out what's on the other side.
Fascinating. I like that, because I mean, that's really refreshing. You know, because I mean, I think like there's so many people making music that haven't done the identity thing. You know, I mean, there's so much like. There's so much imitation music. It's the majority of music.
Yeah, of course.
And those people just haven't gone on that journey yet of discovering.
I think we all do it. I mean, I think the thing is we all are constantly imitating. I mean, that's what I mean. You know, if you're making music that's 120 BPM, you know, and it's got a kind of a kick drum every four beats or whatever, you are by definition kind of like, you know, unless you're doing something that's so kind of out there that it's just like noise. You're following in someone's footsteps. I do it every single day. You know, I guess it's that thing about influence. You have to kind of use it. You have to kind of fit somewhere into the sort of like the evolution of whatever it is that you do. You know, you're never going to be a kind of. There are people who are just completely unique, and I think, you know, at the risk of repeating myself, I think David Lynch is a good example. But you know, and even then there's echoes of stuff that comes before. But there is, I also, you know, I mean, I try not to be too negative, because I find it all too easy to kind of fall into a trap of sort of moaning about the world. But there is, I do think, an increasing tendency toward just kind of mimicking styles because of the sort of algorithmic kind of nature of the way music is consumed. You know, I go to the gym around the corner from here, and I can't keep headphones in my ears. These little ones, like, they just fall out. I think I've got like weird shaped ear canals or something. So this one, I've just, thankfully, is just kind of staying in. But I can't work out with headphones, so I get forced to listen to what music they play in there.
Oh dear. And
it's been a sort of like educational experience. I had no idea that so much just like. It just sounds like, I'm guessing it's like a playlist on Spotify or something, but I feel really bad now because I'm just being like negative about other people's music, which is just like something that I try not to do. But I do feel like there's just like an increasing number of people making music in their bedrooms to a sort of template, because they know that it will fit onto this, like, you know, this playlist, or this kind of, you know, this, it will get picked up by this algorithm, or it will get played in gyms or in cafes or in whatever. And, you know, that's a way of making a living, I guess. But I find it, I don't know. I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world, I suppose. It's a shame in some ways, but I guess everyone's got their own approach.
I think like bringing it back then to like something which I find really interesting that we've kind of talked about a bit, and this identity, this understanding yourself and your sound, right? It feels like that has happened quite early on for you in a way, like.
Well, I mean, I suppose there's a kind of there's a meeting of like electronic kind of music and like Iranian music, which I suppose gets, I think, probably kind of understandably seen as something that's sort of, it's not unique. There's a lot of really great Iranian electronic music out there, but it's definitely something that's kind of been in what I've done since I've been releasing music. You know, the first album that I put out had a lot of like Iranian samples on it. More recently, I've been working with Iranian musicians, this incredible singer Malahat and her husband Faraz, who plays kamanche. And we're hoping to play some live shows actually very soon, which is the most exciting thing for me imaginable. I really, really, really hope it happens. Yeah, I mean, between that, yeah, there has been this kind of like cultural kind of like merging of sort of down tempo kind of cinematic electronica and like, you know, that slightly mournful kind of Iranian thing. As to it being, you know, kind of quite early on. I mean, I was making music for like 10 years before I put out the first record I released. And, you know, the stuff that I was doing early on was as kind of messy and as kind of like fragmented. And I was really into drum and bass growing up. So like, you know, a lot of the early stuff that I did was kind of like it was informed by, you know, it was very kind of like dynamic in that respect. There was a lot of like amen breaks and kind of like sort of attempts at making heavy bass lines without really having any decent bass sounds and stuff like that. And I, you know, it was a mess. It was a whole mix of stuff. But yeah, I would say that when I started kind of using Iranian sounds in what I did, it just did kind of click. It did fit together. It felt like that journey that had sort of like begun when I was very young, you know, that kind of those moments in the car listening to my dad's music. It sort of felt like that had come to a natural, you know, a natural, not conclusion, but like it had sort of fallen into place in a way. And when I was recording with Faraz and Mal for the last record, that really felt like kind of, you know, destiny. It felt like finally I'm working with these actual like brilliant Iranian musicians, and it just like that's kind of all it was like that moment where you just think this is kind of what I wanted, like it's this is what I want. I don't care if like this is all I ever do now, you know. I just want to work with these guys. I just you know, I'm not saying that they feel anything like the same thing, but it's like that made so much sense. And Iranian music is in itself, it can be, it's so many things. I don't want to kind of pigeonhole it, but there is a sort of tendency towards kind of like you know, reflection and nostalgia and kind of wistful sort of melancholy, which always appealed to me. But I think if there's one thing that I've tried to do with music, it's kind of like bring that kind of melancholic side to a place where it can be kind of hopeful as well, you know, like try and fuse kind of, you know, nostalgia with sort of looking forward, you know, rather than just being, you know, I don't want to make sad music, and I don't want to make kind of like just happy music either. I want to make music that kind of, again, like I said earlier, sort of opens up a space that people can kind of find their own kind of emotional responses to. I
think you succeed at that.
Thank you.
You know,
thank you very much.
It's exactly what I get when I listen to it. You know, it's got
it's lovely to
melancholy, and you know, just that like great balance of sadness and euphoria. And,
yeah.
You know, it's very emotionally mature. You know.
Oh, I certainly don't feel very emotionally mature, but if that's how it sounds, that's great.
That's that's definitely what comes through, and
thank you.
And it, you know, I just really feel like you have that I think maybe heritage has got something here, because like I listen to a lot of music, and I think where a lot of music perhaps fails is that people might take sounds that sound good to them from different cultures and put them together, but a lot of music that kind of doesn't quite make it for me is just a bit of a mishmash. And I don't think the person's really like given it lots of thought as to who they are and what represents them. And I think a big turning point for me was in the stuff that I'm doing now is to like figure out my heritage and like music history and like
what is that?
Yeah, exactly. You know, just asking those questions.
So you're looking into your own kind of background culturally to ask those questions.
Yeah, I mean, like I spent a lot of time looking at music history, like Western European music, and like the evolution and like the just looking at a lot of the old classical and concert music and those types of things, and like that's been a real amazing thing to do, because I feel like I'm able to represent some of that in my music, with modernity, and some Scottish influences from my father. I didn't really know my father, but so it's like kind of an abstract thing in a way, but I think again you can sort of get feedback from people can listen to something and go, wow, yeah, I really get that's you, and it's like, oh, okay, that's me, cool. So that they do fill in the gaps in the way that you were talking about. And I guess I'm going on a bit of a rant here, but
it's interesting.
I really like the track that you did with your father. They did the poem, the vocals and stuff. And like
I've done two with him actually. There's one at the end of an album called All the Troubled Hearts, and there's one that on the end of the last record that I did as well. I think it's interesting, like what you're saying is absolutely true about the sort of people just using stuff without really thinking about it. But I think there's also a kind of flip side to that. There's always a kind of balance involved with this stuff, and I think that you can definitely overthink stuff. I think you can just overthink music generally. Music is, it's meant to be, it's interesting and you want to think about it, but it's also, I've worked in the past with musicians who are kind of very strictly adhere to kind of classical kind of conventions and things. These are kind of red lines. You don't do this, you don't do that. A lot of the time those things are there for good reason. It's like don't ever kind of cross the streams or whatever it is. It's like, there are things that you just kind of, there's a reason why you're not supposed to do them. It's because they sound shit or whatever it is. But also I think there's a point where like you have to just let music kind of flow. And again, that sounds kind of corny, but one of the things that I found working with Iranian music, particularly kind of Iranian strings, and working with Faraz as an example, that he plays this instrument called the kamanche, and that instrument, when he plays what he plays, and I take what he's played and I just put it into stuff that I'm working on, to be honest, 9 times out of 10, it just fits there without any movement, any editing, any kind of cutting or pasting. It's like it just works. It just kind of fits. It just kind of has that natural kind of harmony to it. And I think sometimes you just don't want to overthink it. I think people that tell you because of these rules that have been written, I think sometimes those rules are meant to be obeyed, and sometimes they're meant to be at least kind of investigated, and sometimes you just ignore them. It's like you definitely want to kind of, you don't want to be held back by the past. You don't want to spend all your time staring at it, and not noticing what's going on around you. That's and Iranians are very guilty of that. Like, as a culture, we, I'm half Iranian, but I still know all too well how nostalgia can kind of cast such a shadow, like a kind of reflection on how things were better when, before this, before that. I mean, it's great to kind of let the past kind of in, but not to be kind of ruled by it or guided by it too much.
That's so true. Yeah, and I can, I think again, the music that you're doing is has that philosophy within it, right? Because you're taking traditional Iranian instruments and then you're
I suppose that's true.
combining them. So that really comes across, and I absolutely agree with what you're saying about breaking rules. It's so important. I was listening to, because I've been listening back to a lot of music that I used to really like in the 90s, and re-listening to the Prodigy albums and like, so Smack My Bitch Up, and it's like, Smack My Bitch Up, I was thinking about it this morning when I woke up, it's such an oddball mixture of different samples. It's got like some Indian singer in the middle of it, and then it's got like I think the cracking of a whip, and then like some like an English kind of like punk. Like, it just shouldn't work. It's so bizarre, but it just works so well. It's like, man, how
absolutely. I mean, that there was a, if ever there was a group of people breaking rules, it was the Prodigy back then. And I think just like the beauty of like the emerging kind of rave and sample culture of that time was just that it did, people kind of talked about it being just like a sort of, it's just people kind of copying and pasting other people's music. I mean, it kind of became a sort of art form in its own right. And the sort of the record like Introducing by DJ Shadow, which stands as a kind of work of art, which is just an amalgamation of everything that had come before it, all of these influences that he'd kind of arranged and kind of recomposed. And there's something profound about that. Anyone who says, we've got to a point where culture is so stale, everything's been done, you can't do anything original. Well, just take everything that's been done and just kind of shuffle it like a deck of cards, and kind of, that's what people were doing back then. And some of the stuff that came out of it was absolutely amazing.
So, very great in-depth interview, as usual.
Yeah, it's fun.
Props to your skills.
Thanks. Yeah, it was really good. It was deep, and it's subjects that just fascinate me. So it's really easy actually to do. I love it. It was great.
Aren't we lucky?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So tell us about the track you're going to play now.
I've been reading a lot about physics and astrophysics and science and the planet. So I was thinking very much about the different layers of atmosphere, from the stratosphere. And I was thinking about jumping from the stratosphere and just really incorporating the experience of what that might be like in music. A free fall jump, and thinking a lot about the atmosphere and our planet essentially. I hope that comes through in the experience of the piece.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this, and thank you to you all for listening. As usual, you can follow us on social media, email us, links, etc. are all below, so please do come along, join us, let us know what you thought of the interview and of the piece that you're about to play. We'd love to hear your feedback.
Yeah, big love to everyone.